Several things probably come to mind when you hear the term clone shock trooper. Maybe their distinct red markings, blind loyalty, or their passion for killing on sight. But shock troopers didn't become the iron fist of the Republic overnight, and had a much longer history and legacy than most Star Wars fans give them credit for. In this video, we're going to discuss the shocking truth about shock troopers.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Shock troopers were specialized clones trained to focus on quick response and assault capabilities. They were elite soldiers who were trained in stealth and the discretion necessary to surprise, or rather, shock the enemy. Clone shock troopers were trained from birth and raised on Kamino. Clones selected to be shock troopers were separated early on from their brothers and were trained in isolation from the rest of the clone army. When the Clone Wars broke out in 22 BBY, clone shock troopers were some of the first clones delivered from Kamino. They were quickly organized into the Coruscant Guard, a unit with a primary focus on providing security to government buildings and vital infrastructure on the galactic capital. They also augmented the security forces of other Republic installations, such as the Republic Judiciary Central Detention Center, where they also served as jail guards. They also provided much needed assistance to the beleaguered Coruscant Security Force, which simply didn't have the manpower necessary to police the trillions of citizens on Coruscant. Clone shock troopers were equipped with standard DC-15A and DC-15S blasters, with officers carrying the more powerful DC-17 pistol. When facing invasion or serving as an escort, specially trained shock troopers carried RPS-6 rocket launchers and Z-6 rotary blaster cannons. Back on Coruscant, as more and more citizens became unsatisfied with how the war was going, shock troopers were also armed for riot suppression and were armed with riot shields, electro staffs, and TZ-97 Zappa shock batons. As the Clone Wars dragged on, shock troopers' role expanded from simple policing and sentry duty to VIP protection for the Supreme Chancellor and Republic senators, a job that was previously reserved for the Senate Guard. These duties weren't limited to the capital either. Shock troopers increasingly found themselves off-world, serving as military escorts for dignitaries in situations where aggressive negotiations were sure to take place. Some notable examples of this were when Lieutenant Thire accompanied Master Yoda to Toydaria, helping the Jedi Master take out a battalion of droids, and when Commander Thrawn sacrificed himself defending Senator Amidala on Scipio. Like the rest of their brothers, clone shock troopers were devoted and fiercely loyal to the Republic, but their isolation and distance from the front lines meant that they rarely had a chance to see the war for themselves, perhaps only learning updates from Republic propaganda. They also lacked a Jedi general to influence their moral and ethical philosophies, reporting directly to the Supreme Chancellor instead. These factors probably clouded their perspectives. In many ways, the Coruscant Guard represented Palpatine's attempts at perfecting his future stormtroopers. Even when shock troopers didn't agree with the orders they were given, they believed that following them was the right thing to do. After all, good soldiers follow orders. Shock troopers had a different history from most other clones. They didn't spend their days blasting battle droids. Instead, they spent their days policing civilian populations. In 21 BBY, a series of separatist terrorist attacks and bombings on Coruscant allowed Palpatine to secure greater powers and influence for the shock troopers. The Senate granted them the authority to conduct random searches and identity checks on all citizens, as well as other powers akin to those contained in the 2001 Patriot Act in the US. Under Commander Fox, the Coruscant Guard took over many police investigations and operated under the assumption that everyone was guilty until proven otherwise. Often, they would end up killing their targets before they could prove otherwise. This was certainly the case when Clone Trooper 5s was framed for attempting to assassinate the Supreme Chancellor and labelled a dangerous criminal. When Fives tried to explain himself to Anakin and Captain Rex, Commander Fox led a squad of shock troopers who were tasked with hunting down Fives, and the rest, they say, is history. There was no attempt made to arrest him or to give him a fair trial. For the shock troopers, he was already guilty in the eyes of the Republic. This was a serious problem. It's not a good thing when a society's military becomes the sole judge, jury, and executioner. And as Commander Adama of the Battlestar Galactica once said so perfectly,
"I'm not going to be your policeman. There's a reason why you separate military and the police. One fights the enemy of the state. The other serves and protects the people. When the military becomes both, then the enemies of the state tend to become the people."
Shock troopers weren't just the military and police combined. They were the invisible hand that Palpatine used to crush dissent and opposition as he dismantled democracy. By 19 BBY, Republic prisons were overflowing with people Palpatine had deemed enemies of the state. The Coruscant Guard treated prisoners even worse than how clones on the front lines treated their captured enemies. They showed no mercy, no compassion, no understanding, only caring about the orders they had been given. They cared very little for the prisoners in their care and were willing to kill them in case they tried to escape instead of recapturing them. To them, they weren't just criminals, they were traitors to the Republic. Before long, shock troopers were no longer just standing guard in front of government buildings, but patrolling the streets, transportation hubs, and the critical infrastructure of Galactic City. With the betrayal of Captain Argyus in 21 BBY, the Senate Guard was no longer trusted with transporting high-value criminals like Viceroy Newt Gunray, and this role was absorbed by the Coruscant Guard as well. These clones were the definition of power left unchecked, and they answered to no one except the Supreme Chancellor and Admiral Tarkin. They were cold and calculating, but they were efficient, and they were instrumental in helping build an empire. Like clone commandos, shock troopers didn't see themselves as regs. In fact, they looked down on their brothers and loved to take a power trip whenever they could. These troopers would not hesitate to execute one of their own, even when they knew it was wrong. While we've met clones like Rex, Gregor, and Wolf who understand the values that they were bred to protect, the shock troopers blindly followed orders long before their inhibitor chips were ever activated. They had grown cocky and corrupt, just like the Republic they were charged to protect. In canon, after Order 66, shock troopers around the galaxy started executing a series of special orders. Shock troopers guarding Darth Maul were ordered by Captain Rex to execute him, but were stopped by Ahsoka Tano, who needed Maul as a diversion. Commander Thaya was tasked with searching for Master Yoda's body after his duel with Palpatine in the Senate chamber. A contingent of shock troopers were also deployed to Kamino, as seen in the first season of Star Wars: The Bad Batch. Shock troopers also carried away dead Jedi on Kamino, as witnessed by Clone Force 99. Afterwards, they began arresting and executing the Kaminoans the Empire no longer deemed necessary. Under Admiral Rampart's command, they seized control of the capital, Tipoca City, and began evacuating all clones, researchers, and scientists in preparation for an orbital bombardment, which destroyed the entire city and all its cloning facilities. As the rest of the galaxy processed the end of the war, many Republican citizens were shocked to see clone shock troopers deployed on their own worlds. Planets that had been promised that the clone army would leave after the war only got broken promises and new Imperial checkpoints and military installations. Imagine if the police in your country were suddenly replaced by police from a different country or even different planet who are not loyal to you or your people. It was in everything but name the start of an Imperial occupation on many worlds. As Proto-Stormtroopers, shock troopers embodied everything Palpatine valued in his troops: unquestioning loyalty, dedication, and the ability to complete the mission. Shock troopers were supposed to defend against the enemy, not become the enemy. But in truth, they had never really been meant to protect the people, only convince them that they were safe. The irony of all this shouldn't be lost. While the citizens of the Republic feared separatist control and oppression, in their desperation, they gave up their freedoms and their rights, trading them for a false sense of security. The shocking truth about shock troopers is that instead of serving as protectors, they served as enforcers for a new empire. So, that's the shocking truth about how shock troopers became the very thing they swore to destroy. But what do you think? Feel free to leave your comments down below.